Have you ever felt so small, so utterly erased by someone who once promised you the world? What happens when the person who broke you tries to humiliate you one last time in front of everyone, believing you are nothing without them? This is the story of Eleanor Vance, a woman pushed into the shadows by a cruel ex-husband who steps into the most elite gala of the year expecting a night of quiet endurance. She had no idea she was about to be at the center of a storm, a public spectacle that would end with a reclusive billionaire making an announcement that would not only shatter her ex's world, but redefine the very meaning of power, loyalty, and love. Stay tuned, because the greatest revenge is not loud. It is absolute. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, nestled between a gallery catalog and a utility bill. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock, the kind of paper that felt unapologetically expensive. The embossed crest of the Sterling Foundation shimmered under the dim light of Eleanor Vance's small apartment. The name was a cruel irony, a ghost from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. The Metropolitan Innovators Gala. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. Innovators. Richard Sterling, her ex-husband, had certainly been innovative in the ways he'd found to dismantle her piece by piece. For 12 years, she had been Eleanor Sterling, the brilliant, supportive wife of the rising tech mogul. She, an art historian with a doctorate from Columbia, had put her own career on hold to be his sounding board, his editor, his strategist. It was her idea, born from a late-night discussion about Renaissance patronage, that sparked the core concept for ConnectSphere, the social integration software that made Richard a titan of the industry. He called her his muse. Then, once the empire was built, the muse was discarded. The divorce had been a masterclass in public humiliation. Richard's lawyers painted her as a grasping, unambitious woman clinging to the coattails of his genius. He left her for Tiffany, a 22-year-old model and influencer, whose primary contribution to society was her curated Instagram feed. He kept the sprawling penthouse overlooking Central Park, the company, the friends, and the name. She was left with a modest settlement, enough to ensure she wouldn't starve, but small enough to be an insult and the hollowed-out shell of her former self. That was 3 years ago. Now at 38, Eleanor's life was quiet. She had shed the name Sterling, like a snake sheds its skin, reclaiming her maiden name, Vance. She worked as a senior researcher and acquisitions consultant for the Halcyon Gallery, a small but fiercely respected private art space in Soho. Her boss, a kindly older gentleman named Mr. Abernathy, valued her sharp eye and encyclopedic knowledge. It was a life of quiet dignity, a world away from the flashbulbs and fake smiles of her past. She was healing slowly. So why this invitation? Her eyes scanned the card. At the special request of our esteemed benefactor. The benefactor. For the past 6 months, the Halcyon Gallery had been transformed by an anonymous donor. This mysterious patron had been acquiring pieces of breathtaking significance, from a lost pre-Raphaelite study to a contemporary sculpture that had the art world buzzing. They communicated only through a law firm, their requests precise, their payments instantaneous. Mr. Abernathy had tasked Eleanor with being the sole point of contact, liaising with the lawyers, authenticating the pieces, and writing the provenance reports. She had never met the benefactor, never even heard their name, but she felt a strange kinship with them through their shared taste in art. It was their latest acquisition, a rare collection of sketches by Egon Schiele that was being loaned to the Metropolitan Museum for this very gala. He specifically requested you attend as the gallery's representative, Mr. Abernathy had told her that afternoon, his eyes twinkling. Said you were the only one who truly understood the collection's soul. Now, standing in her quiet apartment, surrounded by books instead of jewels, Eleanor felt a wave of pure dread. The gala was Richard's kingdom. It was the annual coronation where he showcased his success. Going there meant seeing him seeing her. It meant stepping back into the lion's den she had barely escaped with her life. Her phone buzzed. It was her best friend Chloe. "Did you get the invite to the Apocalypse Ball?" Chloe's voice was laced with its usual brand of loving sarcasm. "It's not funny, Chloe. I can't go." "Oh, yes, you can. You are going to go, Ellie. You are going to walk into that museum with your head held so high it will create a draft. You are no longer Mrs. Sterling, the sad little wife. You are Eleanor Vance, the woman who can spot a forged Degas from 20 paces, and who is the personal art guru to some mysterious billionaire. This isn't his stage anymore. It's yours. Eleanor sank onto her small sofa, the invitation feeling like a lead weight in her hand. I don't have anything to wear, Chloe. My gala days are over. My wardrobe consists of sensible blouses and gallery-appropriate heels. Leave that to me, Chloe said, her voice suddenly conspiratorial. But I have a feeling your benefactor has already thought of that. Just say you'll go. For me. For you. Eleanor closed her eyes, picturing Richard's smug, handsome face. She pictured the pitying looks from their old friends, the whispers, the condescending smile of his new wife. The fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but beneath it a tiny, unfamiliar ember of defiance began to glow. Why should she hide? She had done nothing wrong. She had survived. Maybe Chloe was right. It wasn't about him. It was about her. Okay, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'll go. She had no idea that this single word was not an end to her quiet life, but the beginning of a revolution. The week leading up to the gala was a torment of anxiety. Eleanor found herself staring into space during meetings, her heart pounding at the thought of the inevitable confrontation. She imagined Richard's cutting remarks, Tiffany's vacant, perfect smile, and the feeling of being an exhibit herself, judged and dismissed by the very people who used to toast her name. Chloe, true to her word, was a whirlwind of support. She insisted on a gala prep evening armed with wine, cheese, and a militant belief in Eleanor's worth. First rule, Chloe declared, pouring a generous glass of Sauvignon Blanc. We do not think of him. We think of you. What do you want to feel that night? Eleanor sighed, swirling the wine in her glass. Invisible, mostly. Wrong answer. Try again. Okay, Eleanor said, a small smile touching her lips. Poised, confident, like I belong there on my own terms? Better, Chloe nodded approvingly. Like the brilliant, sophisticated art historian you are, who is there to represent a priceless collection for a man of impeccable taste. The conversation was a balm, but the question of what to wear loomed large. Eleanor knew the fashion game of that world. It was a battlefield of couture, a language spoken in Chanel, Dior, and Valentino. Her simple, elegant wardrobe was no match. 2 days before the gala, the problem was solved in a way Eleanor could never have anticipated. A courier arrived at the Halcyon Gallery with a long, flat box from Atelier Valerius. Eleanor had never heard of the designer, but the box itself was a work of art wrapped in black silk paper and tied with a silver ribbon. Inside, resting on a bed of tissue, was a note in the same crisp, typed font as the benefactor's previous communications. Ms. Vance, a masterpiece deserves a worthy frame. Please accept this small token of appreciation for your exceptional work. It would be an honor if you would wear it on Saturday. Respectfully, the benefactor. Beneath the note was a gown that stole Eleanor's breath. It wasn't loud or ostentatious. It was a statement of quiet, devastating power. The dress was floor-length, cut from a liquid silk the color of a midnight sky. It had long, elegant sleeves, a high neckline, and a deceptively simple silhouette that flowed over the body rather than constricting it. The only embellishment was a cascade of tiny, hand-sewn silver beads along the spine, shimmering like a distant galaxy. It was the kind of dress that didn't scream for attention. It commanded it through sheer, unadulterated elegance. It was a dress for a queen, not a princess. Along with the dress was a smaller velvet box. Inside lay a pair of antique diamond and sapphire earrings reminiscent of Art Deco starlight and a matching delicate bracelet. They weren't massive vulgar stones. They were exquisite, tasteful, and worth more than her apartment. Eleanor felt a dizzying mix of shock and gratitude. This benefactor, this complete stranger, seemed to understand her better than the man she had been married to for 12 years. Richard had always bought her things that were fashionable, that reflected well on him. He'd once gifted her a gaudy diamond necklace that she hated calling it a CEO's wife necklace. This gift felt personal. It felt like armor. When she tried it on in her apartment that night with Chloe officiating, they both fell silent. The dress transformed her. It accentuated her slender frame, her graceful posture, and the intelligence in her deep blue eyes. It made her look not like Richard Sterling's forgotten ex-wife, but like Eleanor Vance, a woman of substance and mystery. "Ellie," Chloe whispered, her eyes wide. "Who is this benefactor, because I think I'm in love with him? That dress." "It's not just a dress. It's a message. It says, 'I am not to be trifled with.'" On the evening of the gala, as Eleanor looked at her reflection, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Chloe had arranged for a hairstylist and makeup artist who worked wonders. Her honey blonde hair was swept up into a chic, intricate chignon, and her makeup was subtle but striking, emphasizing her eyes and the elegant line of her jaw. As she fastened the sapphire earrings, the cold weight of the diamonds felt like a promise. A black town car, another courtesy of the benefactor, waited for her downstairs. As she slid into the plush leather interior, her heart hammered against her ribs. Fear was still there, a cold, familiar companion. But it was no longer the only thing she felt. Clad in her midnight silk armor, a flicker of something new ignited within her resolve. She was not going to the gala as a ghost. She was going as the custodian of the Sheila collection, as the gallery's chosen representative, and as the woman chosen by a man of immense taste and power, even if she didn't know his name. She was going as herself. And for the first time in a very long time, that felt like it might just be enough. The Metropolitan Museum of Art was transformed. The great hall, usually a cavern of echoing history, was now a glittering jewel box of human ambition. A symphony orchestra played softly from a balcony, their music a silken thread weaving through the champagne-fueled chatter of New York's elite. Tech billionaires mingled with politicians, fashion designers, air-kissed film stars, and everywhere diamonds glittered like captive stars. Eleanor stepped out of the car and onto the red carpet, her stomach a knot of tightly coiled snakes. The roar of the press was a physical force, a wall of shouting and flashing lights. She kept her eyes forward, her hand clutching the small, elegant clutch that had come with the dress. She gave her name to the check-in desk, Eleanor Vance, and the young woman's eyes widened slightly in recognition before she was waved through. Clearly the benefactor's guest was on a special list. She bypassed the main scrum heading for the quieter wing where the new exhibit was housed. She needed to ground herself to remember why she was there. The Sheila sketches were displayed in a beautifully lit, intimate gallery. Seeing them so raw and full of tormented genius calmed her. This was her world. The lines, the history, the human emotion captured on century-old paper. This was real. The circus in the great hall was the illusion. After a few minutes of composing herself, she knew she couldn't hide forever. Taking a deep breath, she accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and forced herself to step into the throng. It didn't take long. She felt his presence before she saw him, a shift in the energy of the room. Richard Sterling always commanded attention. He stood near the base of the grand staircase, a circle of admirers hanging on his every word. He was devastatingly handsome in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, his smile as bright and predatory as ever. And on his arm, dripping in a garish fire-engine red gown that screamed for attention, was Tiffany. Eleanor tried to turn to melt back towards the exhibit, but it was too late. One of Richard's sycophants, a venture capitalist named Marcus, spotted her. "Well, I'll be damned. Richard, look who it is." The circle turned. Richard's eyes scanned her, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before it settled into a mask of amused condescension. He let go of Tiffany's arm and sauntered towards Eleanor, his acolytes following like pilot fish on a shark. "Eleanor," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "What a surprise. I didn't realize the museum had hired you. Are you on the catering staff tonight? You should have told me. I could have put in a good word." The laughter from his group was a spray of acid. Eleanor's face burned, but she held her chin high. The midnight silk of her dress felt like a shield. "Hello, Richard," she said. her voice cool and even, betraying none of the turmoil inside her. "I'm here as a guest." He smirked, looking her up and down. "A guest? Who'd you come with? Your little gallery boss? What's his name, Abernathy? Did he finally get a new suit?" Tiffany drifted over, her eyes vacant and assessing, flicking over Eleanor's dress. "Wow, that's a very simple dress, isn't it?" she said, her voice a girlish chirp that was meant to sound innocent but was honed to a razor's edge. "I almost didn't even see you." "It's Atelier Valerius," Eleanor replied, calmly naming the designer. Richard let out a bark of laughter. "Never heard of them. I guess that's what your budget allows for these days. It's tough, I get it. From Patek Philippe to, well, this." He gestured vaguely at her as if she were a piece of uninteresting furniture. Eleanor's blood ran cold. The cruelty was so casual, so practiced. This was the man who had once whispered that she was his whole world. "I'm here representing the Halcyon Gallery," she stated, trying to steer the conversation back to professional ground. "We're the facilitators for the Sheely collection loan." Richard's eyes lit up with malicious glee. He had found his angle. "Oh, that's right, the Mystery Benefactor Collection. I heard about that. Some dusty old money trying to feel relevant. I assume," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "It's cute, Ellie. It really is. Playing with your little pictures in your little gallery. It's good to have a hobby. It must keep you busy while the real world is out here, innovating." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was still loud enough for his circle to hear. "Listen, if things are tight, you don't have to put on a brave face. My foundation has a grant for, let's call it, underprivileged arts appreciation. I could probably have a check cut for your little gallery. A donation. Think of it as alimony part 2. That was it. The final deliberate twist of the knife. He wasn't just mocking her. He was trying to erase her, to frame her entire existence as a pathetic charity case epilogue to their grand story. He was painting her as a failure, a woman so worthless that her only value was as an object of his pity. Eleanor felt the floor drop out from beneath her. The champagne glass in her hand trembled. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. All the poise, all the confidence her armor had given her crumbled under the weight of his targeted cruelty. She was once again that small, broken woman in the lawyer's office listening to a list of her own inadequacies. His smirk widened. He had won. He had proven to himself and his audience that she was still nothing without him. He turned to his friends, ready to deliver a final punchline. "You see, some people just can't," but he never finished his sentence. A voice, quiet yet carrying the resonant authority of a thunderclap, cut through the air from behind Eleanor. "That's because Mr. Sterling," the voice said, "smooth as aged whiskey, Ms. Vance is not here to appreciate art. She is here to curate a legacy. My legacy." The circle around Richard fell silent. Every head, including Eleanor's, turned towards the source of the voice. Standing there was a man who seemed to absorb the light around him rather than reflect it. He was tall and lean-dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit that was remarkable only for its understated perfection. His hair was dark with subtle threads of silver at the temples, and his face was all sharp angles and intelligent shadows. He wasn't handsome in the conventional polished way Richard was. He was compelling his presence, a gravity well that bent the room around him. His eyes, a startlingly pale gray, were fixed on Richard with an expression of profound disappointment, as if observing a particularly uninteresting insect. Eleanor recognized him instantly, though she had never seen him in person. She had seen his photograph only once in a highly restricted file Mr. Abernathy had shown her. Damien Blackwood. The name was a legend in the worlds of finance, technology, and private equity. He was a ghost, a myth. He owned a dozen corporations across multiple sectors, but his name was on none of them. He never gave interviews, was never photographed, and was rumored to be so reclusive he ran his multi-billion-dollar empire from a remote, undisclosed location. He was the ultimate power player because he had no interest in the fame that came with it. To see him here in the flesh was like seeing a unicorn walk into the room. Richard Sterling, for the first time all night, looked utterly speechless. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. Damien Blackwood took a step forward, his movements fluid and deliberate. He came to stand beside Eleanor, not touching her, but creating an undeniable barrier between her and Richard. His focus shifted from Richard to her, and the intensity in his pale eyes softened into something like concern. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice now a quiet murmur meant only for her. "I apologize. I was delayed. I trust you haven't been too bored by the company." Eleanor's mind was reeling. He was the benefactor, the man whose taste she admired, whose intellect she had felt across months of correspondence, was Damien Blackwood, the most enigmatic and powerful man in the city. She found her voice a shaky whisper. "Mr. Blackwood, I had no idea." "That was the arrangement," he said with a faint smile. "Anonymity can be efficient, but it seems some situations call for a more direct approach." His gaze flicked back to Richard, who had regained a fraction of his composure and was now puffing up his chest, trying to reclaim his dominance. "Blackwood," Richard said, forcing a bluff, hearty tone. "Didn't know you were in town." "Richard Sterling. Sterling Innovations." He stuck out his hand. Damien looked at the offered hand as if it were a soiled piece of garbage. He made no move to take it. "I know who you are, Mr. Sterling." The words were flat, devoid of any warmth. The unspoken addendum, "and I am not impressed," hung in the air. The public snub was brutal. Richard's hand dropped to his side, his face flushing a deep mottled red. His sycophants shuffled their feet suddenly, very interested in the ceiling architecture. Tiffany looked back and forth between the two men, her perfectly made-up face a mask of confusion. "You know, Eleanor?" Richard stammered, gesturing awkwardly between them. "Ms. Vance and I have been working together for some time," Damien said, his voice a low, dangerous purr. He finally turned his full attention back to Eleanor, effectively dismissing Richard and his entire entourage as if they had ceased to exist. "The Shealy exhibit is magnificent. Your notes on the provenance of number 7, the reclining woman, were particularly insightful. You identified a watermark from the Arches paper mill that every other expert had missed. It recontextualizes the entire period of his work from 1917. Eleanor stared at him dumbfounded. He was discussing the finer points of art history in the middle of a high-stakes social standoff. He wasn't just the money, he was an intellectual partner. He had read her work, understood it, and valued it. In that moment, surrounded by 100 of the city's most powerful people, he made her feel as if she were the only person in the room. The humiliation Richard had inflicted on her began to evaporate, replaced by a bewildering sense of validation. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood," she managed to say. "I felt it was significant. It is more than significant." "It is brilliant," he stated as if it were an indisputable fact. He then offered her his arm. "Now, if you'll excuse us, Mr. Sterling, Ms. Vance and I have matters of actual innovation to discuss. I believe the museum curator is waiting for us." Without a backward glance, he guided Eleanor away from the stunned group. As they walked, a wave of whispers parted before them and closed in their wake. Eleanor could feel every eye in the great hall on them, on her. Richard Sterling was left standing by the staircase, his face a thunderous mask of fury and confusion. He had intended to make her a footnote in his story, a punchline to a joke. But a king had just stepped onto the chessboard and flipped the entire game. And Eleanor Vance, to her own profound shock, found herself standing right beside him. Walking through the gala on Damien Blackwood's arm was a surreal experience. The sea of faces, which had seemed so threatening just moments before, now parted for them with a mixture of awe and frantic curiosity. People who had looked through Eleanor earlier now met her gaze with desperate fawning smiles. The power shift was palpable, a physical change in the atmosphere. Damien led her not towards the curator, but to a quiet, roped-off balcony that overlooked the Egyptian exhibit and the great temple of Dender. The noise of the party faded to a distant hum. The city lights glittered through the massive glass wall beyond the temple. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice losing its icy edge and becoming genuinely gentle. He released her arm, giving her space, but his pale gray eyes searched her face with concern. I think so," Eleanor stammered, her heart still beating a frantic rhythm. "I'm just stunned. You are the benefactor." "I am," he confirmed. "I apologize for the deception. I find my name often complicates things. People hear Blackwood and their behavior changes. I wanted your unbiased expertise, and I received it. It is, as I said, brilliant." "You saw what he did." She said the words, a quiet statement, not a question. The memory of Richard's cruelty was still a fresh wound. Damien's expression hardened. "I saw a small man attempting to diminish a woman he is incapable of understanding. It was distasteful." He leaned against the stone balustrade, his silhouette stark against the ancient temple. "I have been observing Richard Sterling for some time, Ms. Vance. Not for personal reasons, but for professional ones. His company is built on a foundation of sand and smoke. He is a master of promotion, not innovation, the kind of man who mistakes volume for value." There was a chilling finality in his tone, as if he were delivering a eulogy for a company that was still by all accounts on top of the world. "I want to thank you," Eleanor said, finding her footing. "Back there, you didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," he replied simply. "Allowing mediocrity to insult brilliance is a cardinal sin." Besides, he added, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips, "he insulted my chief curator. I can't allow that." Eleanor's brow furrowed. "Your chief curator?" Before he could answer, the host of the evening, the director of the museum, appeared at the entrance to the balcony. "Mr. Blackwood." "There you are. We're ready for the announcement whenever you are." Damien nodded. "It's time." He turned back to Eleanor, his gaze steady and intense. "Stay here for a moment. I'll be right back for you." He walked back into the main hall. A hush fell over the crowd as he was led to the small stage set up on the grand staircase. Eleanor watched from the shadows of the balcony, her heart in her throat. What was he doing? Damien Blackwood took the microphone. His presence was so commanding that no one spoke. The silence was absolute. "Good evening," he began, his voice amplified throughout the cavernous space. "For years I have invested in the future, in algorithms, in biotech, in energy. We build things to make life more efficient. But I've come to believe that a future without a deep, abiding understanding of our past is a hollow one. A legacy is not just built with steel and code. It is built with beauty, with history, with the soul of human creation." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found Richard Sterling, who was standing trapped and exposed in the center of the room. Tonight's gala is about innovation. But true innovation doesn't just look forward. It preserves the genius that came before. That is why I am announcing the formation of the Blackwood Foundation for the Arts. With an initial endowment of $5 billion, its sole purpose will be to acquire, preserve, and display the world's most significant cultural artifacts, making them accessible to everyone, not just the privileged. A collective gasp went through the audience. It was one of the largest philanthropic gestures in modern history. An institution of this magnitude cannot be run by a committee of financiers. Damien continued, his voice resonating with passion. It requires a leader with a singular vision, an unparalleled eye, and an incorruptible dedication to the soul of the work. It requires someone who understands that a single brushstroke can hold more truth than 1,000 lines of code. He turned his head slightly, his gaze finding Eleanor on the balcony. He extended his hand towards her. The foundation already has its first director and chief curator, a woman whose work I have admired from afar, and who I have had the great privilege of working with directly for the past several months. A woman who tonight was publicly insulted by a man who wouldn't know a masterpiece if it was hanging in his own home, which I can assure you it is not. The jab was so direct, so savage, that several people gasped. Richard Sterling turned the color of ash. "Ladies and gentlemen," Damien's voice boomed, "please join me in welcoming the director of the Blackwood Foundation, a woman of immense talent and integrity, Ms. Eleanor Vance." The world stopped. Time itself seemed to freeze. Every single eye in the room swiveled from Damien Blackwood to the woman standing on the balcony bathed in the soft light from the Egyptian hall. Numbly, Eleanor felt herself move as if pulled by an invisible string. She walked to the staircase, her legs unsteady. Damien met her at the top step, taking her hand. His grip was firm, warm, and grounding. He led her to the center of the stage, to his side. He turned back to the microphone, his arm moving possessively to rest on the small of her back. The crowd was a blur of shocked faces. Tiffany's mouth was hanging open. Richard looked like he had been physically struck. Damien Blackwood leaned into the microphone, his voice dropping to a confidential, almost intimate tone, yet it carried to every corner of the hall. "Legacy, you see, is not a solo act. It requires a partner, a visionary, someone who is not just an accessory but the very core of the mission." He looked down at Eleanor, his pale eyes full of an emotion she couldn't dare to name. Then he looked back at the stunned audience and specifically at the broken man in the center of the room. "I am building a new empire, an empire of art and history. And make no mistake," he said, his voice ringing with absolute, indisputable power. "Eleanor Vance is not just its director, she is its queen." The silence that followed Damien's declaration was so profound, it felt like a physical object. It lasted for 3 long, drawn-out seconds before the room erupted. It wasn't just applause. It was a cacophony of frantic whispering, the clinking of hastily set-down glasses, and the low roar of 1,000 different realizations dawning at once. The world had just been rearranged, and Eleanor Vance was now at its epicenter. Flashbulbs, which had previously ignored her, now exploded in a blinding frenzy. The press held back at the edges of the room surged forward, their questions a chaotic chorus. "Ms. Vance, what is your vision for the foundation? Mr. Blackwood, are you and Ms. Vance partners professionally and personally?" "Eleanor." Over here, Damien shielded her, his hand never leaving her back. He murmured something to a security guard who appeared as if from nowhere, and a path was cleared. He led her off the stage, not back to the party, but towards a private exit. As they passed the spot where Richard had been standing, Eleanor couldn't help but look. He was still there, frozen, his face a grotesque mask of disbelief and rage. His circle of sycophants had instinctively taken a step back from him as if he were suddenly radioactive. Tiffany was staring at Eleanor, her expression no longer smug, but filled with a dawning horror. She was looking at the woman her partner had called a worthless hobbyist, who was now being called a queen by a man 10 times more powerful and 100 times more respected than Richard would ever be. In that moment, Tiffany wasn't looking at a rival. She was looking at her own potential future. Richard's eyes met Eleanor's. The condescension was gone, replaced by a desperate, panicked confusion. He opened his mouth, taking a step toward her, his hand half raised as if to stop her, to demand an explanation. "Ellie! Wait!" Before he could take another step, Damien stopped and turned, positioning himself squarely between Richard and Eleanor. His face was devoid of all emotion, which was somehow more terrifying than any overt anger. "Mr. Sterling," Damien said, his voice dangerously soft, "you've already had your say tonight. I suggest you don't embarrass yourself further. You are no longer relevant to Ms. Vance's world." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Or to mine." With that final surgical dismissal, he guided Eleanor away, leaving Richard Sterling standing alone in the wreckage of his own arrogance. They were ushered into a private study deep within the museum's administrative wing. The heavy oak door closed, shutting out the clamor of the world. Eleanor finally let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her entire body was trembling. "A $5 billion foundation," she whispered, sinking into a leather armchair. Director Queen Damien poured 2 glasses of water from a crystal carafe on the desk. He handed one to her, his fingers brushing hers. The endowment is real. The directorship is yours if you'll accept it. I meant every word I said about your talent. He took a seat opposite her. The Queen part was a moment of editorializing. My apologies if it made you uncomfortable. I found his possessive dismissal of you offensive. I wanted to make the new dynamic clear in a language he would understand. Clear is an understatement, she said, a shaky laugh escaping her. You detonated a bomb in the middle of the Great Hall. He built a glass house. Ms. Vance Damien replied, his gray eyes glinting. I merely pointed out the structural flaws. What happens next is simply physics. And the physics were brutal. Before they had even left the museum, Eleanor's phone, which she'd left in her clutch, began to vibrate incessantly. Emails, texts, alerts from news apps. The story was already breaking, spreading through the digital world like wildfire. Reclusive billionaire Damien Blackwood announces 5B Arts Foundation, appoints ex-wife of rival Richard Sterling as director. But the true twist, the final turn of the knife, came an hour later as they sat in the silent, moving cocoon of Damien's Rolls-Royce gliding through the sleeping city. A discreet ping came from Damien's phone. He glanced at it, a grim line touching his lips. It's begun, he said quietly. What's begun? Eleanor asked. I told you I was observing Sterling Innovations for professional reasons, he explained, turning to face her. For the past year, my primary tech company, Ethelred Technologies, has been in stealth mode developing a new generation of integrated business platforms. It's a quantum leap beyond anything currently on the market. We are officially announcing its launch at 9 a.m. tomorrow. It will make Sterling's ConnectSphere obsolete overnight. Eleanor stared at him, the pieces clicking into place with dizzying speed. But that's not all, Damien continued, his voice cold as steel. ConnectSphere's recent stock surge was based on their announcement of a massive new contract to provide data infrastructure for the city of Chicago. My legal team discovered 2 days ago that the contract was secured through bribery and back-channel deals. The evidence was submitted to the SEC and the Department of Justice this evening precisely at 10 p.m. He looked at his Patek Philippe watch. In approximately 8 hours, when the market opens, Sterling Innovations stock will be worthless. The board will call for Richard's immediate resignation. He'll be facing federal fraud charges. His assets will be frozen. Eleanor felt a wave of vertigo. This wasn't just a social takedown. It was a complete and utter annihilation. Richard hadn't just been humiliated. He had been erased. You planned this? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I planned the business move, Damien corrected gently. It has been in the works for years. The timing of the legal submission was a strategic decision. His public behavior tonight simply removed any lingering sympathy I might have had for him. He chose to make a spectacle. He misjudged his opponent. He misjudged you. The scale of it was terrifying, breathtaking. Richard had mocked her for her little gallery job, all while the man she was working for was quietly preparing to obliterate his entire world. He thought he was the king, never realizing he was just a pawn in a much larger game, a game he didn't even know was being played. Richard's cruelty hadn't been the cause of his downfall, but it had been the catalyst for its breathtakingly public and immediate nature. He had lit the match himself. The morning after the gala, Eleanor awoke to a world that was no longer her own. It felt as though the volume of her quiet life had been turned up to a deafening roar overnight. Her phone, which she'd silenced before falling into an exhausted sleep, was a dark, vibrating rectangle on her nightstand displaying 99+ notifications. A quick, hesitant glance revealed a maelstrom of texts, missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize, and news alerts from every major publication, all featuring her name alongside Damien's and Richard's. She sat up in bed, the borrowed silk dress from the night before pooled on a chair, a shimmering puddle of midnight. The woman she had been just 24 hours ago, the quiet, unassuming art historian, felt like a person from a past life. That woman worried about gallery budgets and whether she would have the strength to face her ex-husband. This new woman, the one staring back from the screen of her phone, was the mysterious curator, the woman at the center of the Blackwood bombshell, the queen to a new empire. It felt both terrifying and strangely powerfully liberating. The news of Richard's downfall was not just a story. It was a saga unfolding in brutal real time. News tickers reported that trading of Sterling Innovation stock had been halted, pending an SEC announcement. Articles with grim headlines detailed the federal investigation into bribery and securities fraud. Financial analysts who had once sung Richard's praises now spoke of his company as a house of cards, a monument to hubris. The narrative was absolute. He wasn't a fallen giant. He was a fraud who had finally been exposed. Eleanor felt a strange detachment from it all. There was no surge of triumphant joy, no satisfying taste of revenge. There was only a quiet, profound sense of finality, like closing a very old, very heavy book. His spectacular implosion didn't bring her happiness, but it did bring her peace. The ghost that had haunted her for 3 years had finally been exorcised not by her own hand, but by the undeniable weight of his own actions. 2 days later, she walked into the Ethelred Technologies Tower for her first official meeting as director of the Blackwood Foundation. The building itself was a statement, a sleek, minimalist blade of glass and steel that seemed to disappear into the sky. Damien's office was on the top floor, a vast, airy space with panoramic views of the city. Yet the room wasn't dominated by the view. It was commanded by the art. A massive Gerhard Richter painting hung on one wall, a contemplative Rothko on another. It was a space that valued thought and beauty over mere corporate power. Damien was standing by the window when she entered, but he turned immediately. He was dressed not in a suit, but in a simple gray cashmere sweater and dark trousers. The formidable billionaire from the gala was gone, replaced by the intense intellectual man she had come to know through his taste in art. "Eleanor?" he said, his voice warm. "Welcome." "Mr. Blackwood," she began, feeling a flicker of her old nervousness. "Damien," he corrected her gently. "I think we're past the formalities." He gestured to a large table where architectural blueprints were unrolled next to stacks of books and portfolios. "This is where we begin," he said. "I have the capital and the infrastructure. But the vision, the soul of the foundation, that comes from you. I want to hear everything, your wildest dreams. If you could build the perfect institution for the arts with no limitations, what would it look like?" For the next 4 hours, they didn't talk about Richard the Gala or the media storm. They talked about art. Eleanor, feeling her confidence swell with every word, laid out her vision. It wasn't just about a museum to house famous works. She spoke of an interactive educational wing for inner-city schools, a state-of-the-art conservation lab that would be a teaching facility for universities, a grant program for undiscovered artists, and a digital initiative to create virtual reality archives of lost or fragile historical sites. She spoke with a passion and authority that had been dormant for years, her hands sketching ideas on a notepad, her eyes alight with purpose. Damien listened, completely captivated. He didn't interrupt, only asking sharp, insightful questions that pushed her ideas further. He saw what Richard had never bothered to look for, the fierce, brilliant mind that had been there all along. In that room, high above the city, Eleanor wasn't a billionaire's new project or an ex-wife who'd gotten lucky. She was a visionary claiming her territory. Weeks turned into a season. Autumn bled into winter, and their partnership solidified into a seamless blend of the professional and the personal. They worked long hours, fueled by coffee and a shared obsessive drive. Their days were a whirlwind of meetings with architects, legal teams, and acquisitions experts. Their evenings were often spent in the hushed quiet of the Halcyon Gallery or Damien's private library, debating the merits of a recently surfaced collection of letters by Mary Cassatt, or the best way to light a Byzantine sculpture. The slow burn of their relationship was built in these small, unguarded moments. It was in the way he'd have her favorite tea waiting for her when she arrived in the morning, or the way she'd leave a rare book on his desk about the history of cartography, a subject she learned he was passionate about. It was in a shared, spontaneous laugh over a ridiculously pretentious art critic's review. One evening, while working late, a news report flashed on the television in the corner of the office. It was footage of Richard looking haggard and defeated, leaving a courthouse swarmed by reporters. Eleanor flinched, an involuntary reaction. Damien immediately picked up the remote and turned the screen off. He didn't say anything, but he met her eyes with a look of such profound understanding and quiet support that it said more than words ever could. In that moment of shared silence, an unspoken intimacy bloomed between them. It was Eleanor who found the building. After scouting dozens of locations, she discovered a derelict, forgotten warehouse on the Lower East Side slated for demolition. It was ugly and crumbling, but it had what she called good bones, soaring ceilings, vast open spaces, and a gritty, authentic history that resonated with the city itself. She spent a week drafting a comprehensive proposal complete with structural assessments and architectural sketches, and presented it to Damien not as a suggestion, but as a certainty. "This is it," she had said, her conviction absolute. "This is the home of the foundation." He had reviewed her detailed plan, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Then it's settled," was all he said. He trusted her vision completely, which led them to this crisp afternoon 6 months after the gala, standing on the rooftop of that very building. The demolition crews had been called off, replaced by architects and engineers. Below them, the city hummed a vibrant tapestry of life. The setting sun cast long golden rays that bathed the skyline in a warm, ethereal glow. "It's hard to believe," Eleanor said softly, her breath misting in the cool air, "that this time last year my biggest professional challenge was authenticating a minor Monet." "And you were brilliant at it," Damien said, coming to stand beside her at the edge of the roof. Greatness is present in the small details before it's ever revealed on a grand stage. He looked out at the view, then turned his gaze to her, his pale eyes serious. "I never properly told you, Eleanor. That night, what I said on the stage. It wasn't a calculated move. It wasn't just a line designed to humiliate Sterling." He took her hands, his grip warm and firm. "When I saw him speaking to you that way, with such casual cruelty, I realized something. He wasn't just insulting his ex-wife. He was desecrating a masterpiece. He owned a treasure he was too blind to see, and his ego couldn't stand the thought of it shining in someone else's gallery. When I called you the queen of my new empire, I was simply stating the truth of what I had come to know over months of working with you. This foundation, these buildings, the money, the collections, they are just the kingdom. You are its heart, its conscience, its soul." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes, but they were not tears of sadness or pain. They were tears of recognition. For so long she had felt like a ghost, a footnote in another person's story. But Damien had not only seen her, he had read every chapter. She thought of the woman she used to be shrinking in Richard's shadow, and the woman she was now standing on the precipice of a future she was designing herself. She had walked into that gala as a survivor. She was leaving this rooftop as a founder. Richard had built an empire of smoke and ego designed to impress the world. Her empire, the one she was now building brick by brick with Damien, was an empire of light, beauty, and truth, a legacy meant to endure. She smiled, a genuine, radiant smile that felt like the sunrise. She squeezed his hands, her resolve as strong and clear as the city skyline before them. "Well then," she said, her voice full of hope and purpose, "we have an empire to build. Let's get to work." And so Eleanor's story isn't just about revenge. It's about reclamation. It proves that your worth is never determined by those who try to diminish you. Richard Sterling saw her as a reflection of his own success, but Damien Blackwood saw her for the brilliant light she was, all on her own. She didn't need a billionaire to save her. He simply provided the stage for a queen who was already waiting in the wings. Her real victory wasn't watching her ex-husband fall. It was in rising to build an empire of her own, one founded on her passion, her intellect, and her unbreakable spirit. What did you think of Eleanor's incredible journey? Was Damien's move an act of justice or a cold-blooded play for power? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more tales of triumph and transformation. Your support helps us bring these powerful stories to light. Thank you for listening.